Pressure.
Yeah, no pressure. Cool. Thank you for the very kind introduction. How much do I have in terms of time? Like,
let's say half an hour.
Half an hour. Okay, I will try to go faster. Let me start with the bad news. First of all, can you see? You can all see, right? The slides. The screen is not huge. So this is super work in progress. The good side of the story is that you are the first ones to see it. So I finished this presentation yesterday, so very fresh things. The bad side is lots of unconfirmed, and I really look forward for your harsh comments. It's a joint work with Mike, who is my boss in Cambridge, and he's a political scientist. So anything that like the political science is to blame him. The topic is on, as you can get from the title, is on the political discontent. And this is, of course, becoming the fancy topic to discuss in visual science in the last year, I would say, for obvious reasons, because we know Brexit, Trump, who is now 4 years old almost, and we are going to see Trump too, probably, hopefully not. But the point is that there is growing attention to the geography of discontent, so why people vote populist parties, why people express political resentments, what are the causes, etc. And here I would cite two pieces of work which are important. The first one is the body of work by Phil McCann on regional inequality. And when he's talking about the geographies of discontent, he talks about regional issues. So regional cleavages. Andres from LSE, with this paper, which is becoming the superstar paper in the Cambridge regions, talks about left behind places. By the way, he puts Birmingham. This is from his presentation, and if I were you, I would write me email and say, well, what's going on here? He puts Birmingham in the places that don't matter. Anyway, so these are the kind of metaphors which have been used so far. What we try to do in this paper is try to explore a different line of a geographical divide, which is between urban and rural places. And they talk about regional issues, about left behind places, but no one has been exploring the urban component, so the urban density divide, if you want. And these, of course, I have to motivate with showing some fancy pictures from fancy newspapers. And here are the headlines. So this is a piece from the New York Times, arguing on how the urban-rural divide has been becoming one of the key fault lines in America. This is a piece from the Atlantic, similarly, growing gaps between cities and the countryside in the US. Interestingly, this was a story, very, very big story in the US in the last years. Recently, this is becoming a global issue. So this is a piece from the FT, I think was from 2018, on how the global urban-rural splits are becoming a global issue, not only in the US, but in other places, in other countries. And of course, last but not least, the Gilets jaunes in France are the quintessential case of this dynamic of Paris against everything else and everyone else in the country. So what we do is try to explore social and political attitudes. So we put political discontent in the title. What we do empirically, we try to analyze attitudes, and I will explain why. And we try to see whether there is an urban-rural divide between places. Obviously, if you can imagine, we find some results of this divide. We find that the differences between places need to be understood as a continuum. So it's not the cities versus the countryside, but we find a sort of gradient. So inner cities versus suburbs, small towns, counties, villages, and an isolated place. And last but not least, composition effects are not enough to explain this variation. Because you may think, okay, well, people sort differently between cities and the countryside. This is definitely part of the story. I would argue that even if there is sorting effects, this is nevertheless important, because if all the highly educated people live in the city and all the rest live in the countryside, that's still a problem, because there is a sort of societal cleavage. But even accounting for that, we still find differences between places in attitudes. And as I said, it's work in progress. So I will try to skip very quickly towards the literature. The point of this slide is that this territorial divide has been somehow forgotten, especially in political science, during the final parts of the 20th century. So there was this idea that the cleavages, which actually, if you take like the beginning of the 20th century, end of 19th and beginning of the 20th century, there were massive divides. And any geographers among you guys? Well, so I put Davide, who is one of the classic geographers, historical geographers from the French tradition. He was describing these kind of issues almost 100 years ago, actually, even more. Yet it had been forgotten, but now the argument is that there is a re-emergence of these cleavages. So again, this urban-rural issue divide is an important issue to think about. And the story, the argument is this time this divide is not based only or is not on the economic issues, but it's mostly based on cultural issues, so on cultural divide. So there is this idea that the cosmopolitans live in the inner cities, and all the others, the nationalists, the sovereignists, live in the rest of the country, or in small towns and in the countryside. This is super clear in the US. I hope you can see this map. This is a very scientifically grounded map from Wikipedia on the 2016 elections. And apart from these counties where the boundaries are not very clear, but this is in particular, this part is extremely clear on how there is a massive polarization in voting between the inner cities, which vote Democrat, and all the rest of the country which vote for the GOP, so for the Republicans. There is quite a lot of research on these, some papers, important books which are being quite influential. And importantly, these differences are significant even after controlling for this composition, also for sorting. The story in the US is that there has been a growing divide over the years, so there is a big, important book, controversial, that talks about the big sort. So people increasingly sorting towards, so if I'm young, educated, I go to a big city, and all the others remain behind. The stories are two. One is economic, so it's what probably we all know if we know Enrico Moretti, so the new geography of jobs, so this sorting based on skills and on positions. The other one is because of political homophily. So it seems that there is research in the US showing on how people migrate, and of course people in the US migrate more, but migrate to places where people are more similar. So if I want to move, I go, if I'm young and liberal, I tend to go to a neighborhood which is populated by young and liberal. This creates this increasing divide. This is a picture which is very compelling on how there has been an increasing trends of distinction between urban and rural place. It basically plots the urban density, so the city size in log, and the share of votes for the Democrats. It's from a working paper by Wilkinson. And you see 1916, there is no, so everyone is voting Democrats, a bit everywhere. There is no correlation, and over the years it increases, and also there is this increasing political divide. So this is the US, but in Europe, which is the focus of our paper, there has been less research. So there is of course some literature on France and on the UK, or in England in particular. And for example, on England, there is the stories about the bifurcation between cosmopolitan areas and backwater provinces. In France, of course, there's been an increasing amount of research because of the Gilets jaunes. And like the French, they have this very nice term, so they say that the Gilets, he writes a book where he argues that the inner cities are inhabited by cosmopolitans and bobos, which are bourgeois bohemian, and all the rest is populated by migrants or by white working class who feel left behind in the countryside and in small towns. Yet, in spite of these two preliminary body of evidence, there is no evidence across the whole continent. So it's unclear to the extent to which this is a common pattern. And this is what we try to explore in the paper. So to provide a cross-country comparative analysis of these patterns. There is one main exception to this. There is a paper by Maxwell, so in the American Journal of Political Science. He does an analysis similar to ours, but he only focuses on migration, and he actually claims that there are no differences. So the differences are only driven by composition effects. So we try somehow this is our baseline where we try to rebuke and say, well, 1 second, this is definitely part of the story, but not entirely, and we also broaden the scope of the outcomes that we analyze. There is also, of course, a paper by Louis Dijkstra, Andres Rodriguez Pose on the geography of anti-U walls. Maybe some of you have read it. But here they have unclear findings on the urban-rural divide. They talk about the left-behind places, and the urban stories it's a bit fuzzy. So, to come out to the empirical hypothesis we want to test, there are two, very simple one. The first one is that there are differences in outlook between residents between urban and rural places or along the continuum, which is the second hypothesis. So the divide is a continuum rather than a dichotomy, which may sound obvious, but it's unclear from the literature, and especially from the debate. Finally, you may say, okay, so what? This is very descriptive, and it is. So we try to go a bit more in depth, at least so far, and we try to test a third hypothesis, which is on what's explaining these differences. Is it only composition effects, or there is something else? And of course, here the story, I mean, this is leading to the massive kind of research on whether differences between places are due because of people or because of places, and so because of composition or because of a geographical context. So our hypothesis, the way we test is that we try to see whether we say that actually differences are not only explained by composition. So if we go to the empirical analysis, we use the European Social Survey. Any of you has worked on this data? Yeah, okay. So you know, so this is a multi-stage random probability sampling survey, surveying the entirety of the EU. 28, I was saying, and yesterday I realized that I had to say 27, and I felt very sad because of this. So it's 20. The countries we cover is EU27 plus the UK, Norway, Switzerland. We consider different waves, so the survey is done in every 2 years. So we have waves 2 to 8, so 2004 to 2016. We are trying to increase wave 9, and wave 1, if I don't mistake, didn't have enough variables for all the countries. We are still left with a sample of 200,000 individuals, which should be representative of the entire population, European population of people aged 15 and more across the EU. So it should be a good data set to use for the analysis. In terms of methodology, it's very, very simple. We run a logit or order logic model. So for outcomes of the matrix Y, and we will analyze different outcomes, so different attitudes. I will go in depth in the next slides. On an indicator of where the person lives. So this is the beta, this is our coefficients of interest. Plus, of course, we control for individual characteristics, which will help us test the third hypothesis on sorting. Plus, we include country and near fixed effects, and what else? Well, this is a model at an individual level, so it's for individuals. We are thinking about adding regional level variables, but at the moment all the variables are at the individual level. Of course, among the socioeconomic controls, we try to include as much as possible. So we have age, gender, education, dummy for a person being not native or not. Employment status, so employed, unemployed, looking for job, etc. Type of occupation, so we have 2-digit ISCO codes, which is quite detailed. So we try to control for industrial composition of city or local economies, if you want. And of course, this is a survey, so we also include post-certification weights in the analysis. So what I show you is all weighted. Of course, important here is the place of residence, on how it's identified, and the survey asks respondents to say, well, how do you classify your place of residence? And the categories is a big city, which will be our baseline category in the analysis. Suburbs, so suburb of a big city, town or small village, country village, or farm or a country house, isolated country. This is the share. It's not perfectly balanced. I don't know how it will correlate, how representative to the share of European population. I haven't checked that, but this is what we have. A caveat, of course, this is self-reported, so it's with the pros and cons. We think that in our case could be helpful in the sense that it's a perception, so it's good that we see what they report. But of course, there might be a person in Luxembourg might consider a city differently than a person close to London, and this is what one of the caveats we need to take into account. So in terms of outcomes, as I was saying, we don't analyze elections, which what has been done before by the previous literature. And our idea is we do this intentionally. The reason is that elections can be, this is what political scientists say, elections are influenced by specific factors, by contextual factors frequently. So what's important is also to see what are the underlying political cleavages, the underlying perceptions of people. This is why we focus on 12 issues for which we have consistent data for our entire sample, and the issues are grouped across 3 dimensions. So the first one is on political engagement. So the idea is we know that political disenchantment is accompanied by, for example, reduced voting patterns, or people not going to vote, or trying to engage in politics with alternative way, and so we will see more views. So this is our first dimension. We want to explore how people feel towards the political system. The second is we somehow connect to the traditional left-right cleavage, so we try to see indicators which may explain the traditional perception of people towards the feeling left and feeling right. Please.
Is your data is cross-sectional or panel?
It's a cross-section, so it's
you won't be able to see the change.
No, unfortunately.
Okay.
Yeah. That's why the time dimension we don't rely, because it's repeated cross-sections, unfortunately.
Okay.
Yeah. Come back to the limitations, I guess, for future. And finally, the third dimension is this new cleavage, new political cleavage, which is not based on the left or right, but is based on this perception of cosmopolitanism versus nationalism. So perception towards immigration, perception towards globalization, which will proxy by perceptions towards the EU. These are the 12 outcomes that we have. Of course, any comments or feelings toward these, our selection is very welcome. Please.
Sorry. Did you, for each of the group, did you construct an index putting all these, for all these sub-index together?
We don't. At the moment we don't, for one reason. Well, for two reasons. The first one is that the way we feel like we lose information. I mean, the other papers they create like principal component analysis indexes.
Okay. So basically you have 12 different
12 outcomes, which so in a way we try to keep the precision. And the reason is also, the second reason is that some of them are, for example, voting is a yes and no, so we have it's a dummy. Like others, it's signing a petition, yes or no. This is yes or no, this is a 0 to 10. So it would be difficult to combine them. It's, I mean, we will have to, let's say, to above and beyond the mean or the median, but we try to have it on the left-right scale. It's and the left-right scale is coded as 0 to 10 again, where 5 is a center, and so this is how it's. Yeah.
That's done for most, including all the integration, which was really hard, is it?
So trusting the police is a 0 to 10. This is 0 to 5. This is 0 to 5. This is 0 to 10. These 4 are 0 to 10. I'm not sure on this one. Perhaps it's 0 to. It's a dummy problem. I remember. Let's see. Trusting the reintegration or 0 to 5.
Right.
Yeah.
Sorry, so I did use the British social attitude survey and the Scottish social attitude survey, which I now suspect is just derived from or very similar to this one, because I see the questions are very similar. But one thing that wasn't clear in those surveys, just is clear here, so the left-right divide.
Yeah.
Does it refer to sort of socialist versus capitalist, or does it refer to progressive values, whatever that should mean, against conservative values? Because they're not actually the same, and it's not always clear what it actually, what people actually have in mind. You could, in principle, be a conservative socialist or a progressive free market or whatever.
I mean, this is a
is there any explanation that of any analysis of what people actually mean by when they say in the survey?
This is a super good question. I don't remember how the question is posed. I mean, I can check it in the paper. I don't think they ask on the. So this is basically a question. The political sciences will link it to the way on which cleavages are structured, and the left-right has traditionally been constructed around two cleavages. One is a redistribution, so role of the state in society. The other one is progressive values, and these two are not the same exactly.
Yeah, they overlap to an extent, but not fully at all.
Yeah, so I think here they just says people, how do you consider yourself? How do you position yourself on the left-right spectrum? If I don't remember wrongly, they don't ask which dimension to consider. Yeah. We somehow try to disentangle in a way. I mean, for example, there is this question welfare state support, so which is somehow linked to the role of the state in society from the rest, and we try to put these values, conservative values, asking about trust in the police and how do you value law and order. So we somehow try to disentangle, but this is our proxies. Yeah.
At least in the Scottish social attitude survey, now I'm not a quant person, so I didn't do any of the fancy stuff, but when I literally looked a lot of question by question and looked at the overlaps, you did have left-leaning economic people often being against membership in the EU, for example. There was this overlap, which was never mentioned in the public debate, so there was this overlap between progressive in the economic sense and in some ways not. I don't want to go into it, but let's say. And
I mean, what you are saying is what I mean. Political scientists are arguing about this cosmopolitan divide. So the view towards in the UK towards the EU or towards migration can be totally intersecting the traditional left-right. So this dimension is And I mean, we saw with Brexit, where Brexiteers or non-Brexiteers were on both sides, and that was a totally different dimension of cleavage. And we see the same also, like I would say, Italy is my country, where people voting for Salvini, which is this extreme far-right party, but the people from the left, so former communists voting for him because he's against migration, for example, or against the EU, so results. This will be a test exactly. I see. That's the approach. Will be a test on your eyesight. So, Tassos, for example, what's here? The third
like
letter.
the night sky. There are a lot of stars. So
Yeah.
it's good.
That's
It's a very clear system.
Suburbs.
That's a nice reply. I appreciate it. So I couldn't make it more exciting. That's the problem we're having to have indicators in the paper. It will be easier to read, but to give you. So these are the results without controlling for individual characteristics for each dimension. So for each dimension, so the first group is political activism. We have a voting in election, sign a petition, contacting politicians, trusting parties, left-right cleavage, so left-right placement, welfare state support, law and order, trusting police, transnational cleavage, so the first two, migration, and the line 2 on trust in the EU. Here I'm reporting the log odds and the odds ratio. Yes, it's the odds ratio, where the baseline category is big city. So everyone is compared to a big city. And you see what I want to underline, that there are significant differences between places. Here I'm just, for the sake of the example, I'm showing you voting the election and sign a petition, and you see that, for example, the modes of political engagement are starkly different between people in the countryside or in more rural places opposed to big cities. So this odds ratio tells you that the person in the countryside is significantly more likely to vote in elections, but not to engage in signing petitions, which is sort of this alternative way of engaging with politics. Same for contacting politicians as opposed to trusting parties. Same story, left-right placement. So this is known in a way. Less urban places tend to be more on the right. On the welfare state support, we don't find evidence. This is interesting. And it wasn't totally unexpected to us, in the sense if this urban-rural divide is increasingly in this new cleavage, we would find stronger results on this part, and indeed we do find massive differences in the coefficients when we explore migration and more EU integration. So places, big cities, are significantly more likely to be in favor of migration for this reason, also because there are most migrants, as we know, and also significantly more likely to be supporting the EU. Importantly, the differences are significant, with the exception of the welfare. The differences are significant across most dimensions, especially in political activism, as I was saying, and this new cleavage. While the coefficients are less strong on the more traditional left-right political cleavage.
Are there differences between the coefficient and significant? For example, the trust in EU. I understand the rural people might trust in EU less because they feel left behind. But the difference regarding the estimated beta not that huge. So did you test if the difference is significant?
You mean between each category?
Yeah.
So this is an ordinal logic. So it's it's all the coefficients are linked compared to the baseline category, right? Which I will assume that it implies that also the difference between the two coefficients are significant.
Yeah.
I could check it. Why not?
It might be useful to present it as a significant.
Yes. I will show you a graph actually and see. You see somehow the confidence intervals, which are. So this was without controls, as we said, without controlling for composition effect. So if you take a picture, you could argue, well, I mean, you need to take care of composition effects. Yes, definitely. But this is a picture telling you how the difference of how polarized, if you want, socially polarized is Europe between urban and rural places. These are the results we're controlling for composition effects. So here we include all the individual observables, so age, occupation, etc., all the variables that I mentioned before. Coefficients reduce in magnitude, so the difference between each coefficient and the baseline here is decreased, but still most of them remain significant, and still, I mean, the odds ratio of, let's say, a person living in the countryside and thinking that migration is bad for the economy is significantly lower than the odds ratio of a person living in a big city, which of course is expectable, but it's important to see that it's even controlling for individual observables, it remains there. Same story for the trust in the EU or more in EU integration. So to give you a better picture of what this coefficient mean, maybe they might be difficult to interpret. Here I'm plotting so these are predicted probabilities. So I select only two because I couldn't do all the 12 categories. So I'm selecting this one, which I thought it's representative and voted in elections. Note that I'm not selecting, I'm not cherry picking the ones with the strongest coefficients. I'm trying to select variables which are somehow along the average coefficients. And these are the predicted probabilities, so holding all the other variables constant and their mean, you see that the probability of voting, so voting yes or no, so voting yes, along the domicile of respondents. And we do see, this is not controlling for composition effects, and we do see there are significant differences in terms of voting pattern. So these are the confidence interval. Same story on migration. So we see here it's very straightforward. Here it's since migration is recorded 0 to 10, this is the predicted probability of a reporting 10. So it's if you want this, you will have to multiply this by 10 if you wanted to see the overall difference between all the categories. The same story here, but this time in these graphs we control for composition effects. So here we control for individual observables, and we do see in fact that there is the slopes are significantly flatter. So indeed there is a big part of it is explained by composition, definitely, but still you still see differences. Here we also do something else. We distinguish the lines between, we hypothesize different groups of age. So for example, here we are controlling between young people, which is up to 33-year-old, I think, 33 to 55 and above 55. And we definitely see that age is a big explanatory factor. So younger people tend to vote significantly less compared to older people. So age is definitely an important variable to take into account, but still that alone doesn't explain. There are still a variation between places. Also interesting to see that you see younger people tend to have higher differences between, these are the younger people. Younger people compare the young people to the old people. Old people tend to be similar a bit everywhere, tend to vote more everywhere. Younger people tend to vote significantly less if they live in a big city compared to younger people living in the countryside. The same story for attitudes towards migration. So the line is less, is flatter, but still there are differences, and also the difference is stronger for people of younger cohorts. So people of younger cohorts are those which are most different between urban and rural places, while people of older cohorts tend to somehow to be flatter, so tend to be more similar across places, which it's an interesting finding. I think this deserves more exploration. This might be a story of sorting of younger people deciding to move if they have more progressive values. Same story as before, as the previous graph. Here we distinguish between people working in manual job as opposed to people working in professional jobs. So manual equal to 1 is this the lower one. You don't see it from the graph, but it's yes, it's the lower one. And again, jobs are a massive explanatory factor in attitudes. So people with different professions, but still there are differences again. And interestingly, again, it's people with professional jobs tend to be similar everywhere, while people with manual jobs tend to be more diverse, whether they live in a big city as opposed to they live in the countryside. Same story here for migration. So same story as youngsters. The final graph that I'm showing here again is a plot where we do the same exercise, distinguishing between people with university graduation diplomas and people without non-graduates. And again, same story. People with university degrees tend to vote significantly more likely to vote, or to be these ones to have a high to be more in favor of migration. And interesting again, people with higher educations are those with the highest difference between places. So I think with this slide I come to the conclusion, and I won't reiterate the story, but the argument is that there are significant differences between urban and rural places. These differences are explained by composition effects, but that's not enough. And last but not least, the divide doesn't confine to the UK or the US, as most teacher has shown, but it seems to be a broader phenomenon across Europe. In terms of implications, it's I guess this is we somehow connect to the current debate on the places that don't matter, on all the narrative, which I'm sure you know very well, because I'm sure it's part of your institute, on how the dominant narrative, especially in the UK, of policies exclusively focused on the growing big cities. It has lots of flaws, has many risks, especially in terms of social cohesion. And I guess you know this is a book by Glaser, The Triumph of the City. So put all the policy efforts toward big cities, and in a way we connect to the debate, trying to criticize this approach. And here just it's a piece from The Guardian again, appeared recently, end of 2019, arguing on how the triumph of the mega cities across Europe has created lots of problems, as they put it, they stole the continent's wealth from smaller areas. So somehow we connect to this debate, but we're also trying to connect to a second issue, which I think is becoming increasingly important, on the challenge of public provision delivery in rural places. So we see the small lagging behind places or rural places are increasingly struggling to provide services to people. And this is what seems to be one of the issues that make people unhappy. So in a small place, they close the kindergarten, the school, the hospital. And as a researcher, I think this is one of the key areas that will be relevant in the next years. So I know, for example, the European Commission is working on it. The OECD are extremely interested. So as a researcher, I would blink an eye and say, guys, this is an area we have to work on in the future, because it's one of the societal challenges. Future steps, and this leads to your previous point on the fact that at the moment we are only explore cross sections, very preliminary. We would like to work more on the time dimension. Probably not with this the European Social Survey, because we don't have the panel dimension, but we are looking for data sets where we can explore the dynamic sorting of people into different places. And also, I mean, again, as a researcher, I would blink an eye on areas that are interesting for future research on why geography matters. there seems to be increasing evidence that the place matters, but we don't know exactly why. There is arguments on feeling discontent, etc., but there is no empirical evidence showing exactly why. This is one of the areas where in visual science and geography we need to work more. And interestingly, there is work on this done by psychologists. I'm just coming across super interesting work on how our perceptions and our attitudes are molded by the context where we live. Whole story, but we don't know when and where. For example, is it where we were born? Because the first years is where we socialize, where we spend our impressionable years, which apparently is a term the psychologists use for the window of 18-25, where it seems that we most create our political attitudes. And of course, if you have any suggestions, or I'm very happy to listen to them. And with this, I will thank you for your attention.
Did you have any controls for this, like government investment in areas also, like?
You mean if I control for them?
Yeah.
Not here. So that's it's. I mean, in a way, we'll connect on trying to understand this part of why geography matters, and there is the work, for example, by Andres and Lewis on trying to see whether people are unhappy, whether, let's say, there is economic decline, etc., but we don't do it yet. But that's a nice area for future work, definitely.
Because that might color people's attitudes, and if you're, I mean, if there's investment in the area for health, schools, and everything,
I mean, actually, this is a super important point, and there is I don't know if any of you have read a super interesting paper by I think Timo Fetzer on the American Economic Review, I think, on how austerity, on the impact of austerity of Brexit, and basically argues that if there was no austerity, Brexit, the referendum would have shifted like 5 points in favor of Remain, and so I mean it's exactly the point,
What is the author?
I think it's Timo Fetzer.
Okay.
He's
Brexit,
Sorry, really nice presentation. So, I'm going to go into those last two items you brought forward. But first I would like to ask you, maybe I missed it for your presentation, sorry if that's the case. How did you define the suburbs, towns, and this sort of geographical continuum?
That's given by the European Social Survey.
It's self-declared, right?
It's self-declared, and also these 5 categories are given. So it's the survey designers who decided to ask city, suburbs, and.
So, but is it defined? I mean, I don't know if that data is there in metadata. But is it? Do you know if it's done on the basis of size?
I mean, that's the specific was linking to its self-declared exactly. So I mean, what I was saying is, this is what we have. It's so as I was saying, a person in Luxembourg may feel that they live in a city, while the same size will be a small town in France or the UK.
So you don't have, I mean, apart from this self-reported variable, you don't have any geographical definition like they live in this municipality.
No, unfortunately not.
No, just
because it's of course it's for confidentiality. I mean, every individual is linked to a NAS identifier, but they go in most countries. Some countries they go on NAS2, like the UK. In others they go to NAS3, but you don't go more than that. So it's you have to take it as it is.
Because I was going to make a point about how the distance to your reference categories, you are using the largest cities, metropolises. Maybe how far is this so-called suburbs, towns from there might be mediated. Some locations we haven't, but that's how I think.
I mean,
but I still think, So I was going suggest that for my experience, for my work, geographical characteristics tend to be really important. And you know, the cluster you observe at the geographical level, you know, tells you something that something's going on in that sense. But given these that you just told me, I don't know if you would be able to add geographical characteristics to this analysis, because if you cannot identify the place where the respondent is, yeah, it won't be possible, right?
I mean, this is it's a totally point taken. This is I mean, the best we could do would be to link it to NAS, to regions, with all the broad. For example, to my knowledge, the paper by Andres and Lewis, who is the other, I mean, is the main paper out there exploring geography. They don't have anything better than NAS2, again, probably 3. So they assume that the person, they assume that if a province or a region has bad economy, the person is experiencing it. But it's a very crude assumption.
It is, especially because what the empirical results we got for the UK is telling us that at the local level is very important. So yeah, that's a pity. Okay.
I mean, this is one of the problems, I guess, is most regional science research, that we don't have a specific, very micro data on these, and.
But then I have another thing on this, because these divide or the reactions to this divide or rural continuum might be different by countries, and you can identify countries, right?
Well, yes, there are definitely differences for sure. Yeah.
So would it be possible to select, let's say, a number of countries and do the same analysis by country to check how the continuum changes? Because I saw something really interesting. That's why I was asking earlier about the distance, because I understood that maybe support, as a definition of support, might be nearer to metropolitan areas somehow. Distance is still there. And in your lines, in some of the graphs you showed, you could see sort of a peak. It's not a clear continuum.
Yeah, you refer to this one.
Yeah. So to me that's interesting, because it means that places that we, in this case self-reported, but we may assume are smaller, have a different relationship, so they don't respond to this relationship that we rationally expect. So
yes.
Monotonically increasing or decreasing. So I think that's something worth exploring.
Yes. So the country, we for the analysis we include the country fixed effect. So differences in countries are picked up. So if you want, this is a coefficient of within country variation. So technically that absorbs the issue. Whether to analyze the country by country, nevertheless, yes, we are doing it. The point is that we have lots of tables, so here we just reporting, but we are thinking about selecting a few countries and going in more depth. About these coefficients being not monotonically in line with the others, yes, it's interesting. I don't know how much time I will invest in exploring it, in the sense that it might be that people in the suburbs are, in the sense first of all, in most, let's see the table, in most cases, the coefficients are linear. So this is, it might be some randomness, and I don't know. Yeah.
But you probably can't answer this based on this research, but if you control for all the things that will differentiate urban, rural, or continuum, so age, wealth, class, education, blah, blah, and there's still something left.
Yeah.
What could be causing any ideas? What
I mean,
could be
this
causing
is
the remaining effects?
Yeah, this is what I was trying to connect here. So,
but do you have any ideas what it
well,
could be?
definitely. I would say 3 two main explanations. The first one is this sense of feeling left behind, which is economic decline.
And it will already be reflected in class, wealth, education, etc.
In part, yes.
Yeah.
In part, for example, by the composition, by the job compositions,
Yeah.
and in part, no. You might still think that there are different places exposed to different, let's say, social welfare cuts or different economic trends. I mean, here somehow there is the paper of Lewis, Andres, and others, the one I was referring to, the geography of discontent. Even if they are unable to, they don't disentangle actually whether it's poor people in declining places or wealthy people in declining places, because that's also another hypothesis. It seems, I mean, this is what it seems, but it's all hypothesis, they are not tested. If the people who are most discontent are somehow well-off people, so middle-class people in declining places. So it's the persons, the retired, the one who had wealth and sees his place around going down.
There is some evidence.
Sorry?
There is some evidence of that. So basically, in the UK, that's actually what's happening.
I'm happy to read it because what I see is that people that claim it, but they don't prove whether it's wealthy people. I mean, for example, maybe I have missed a paper. I see evidence that they conflates the two, but I'm very happy to.
Just based on you say, you can test it in your data. Like if you want to see if wealthy people in the village would behave different from the wealthy people in the town, you already have the data to you. Then you can check that. You can check, like you can classify income groups and compare if they are in town or suburb or the village and see if they behave differently in terms of political beliefs.
Yeah, we don't have income data. I don't think they ask income data, but this is a very good suggestion. They ask how do you feel about employment, how do you feel about your...
Oh, you don't have income, but like employment status, that's something.
Yes.
Yeah. Another thing I just want to say is, do you need to understand the society data in the UK? Because you say you are missing the data regarding the economic decline, am I right?
Yeah.
Because that one, if I just look at the data, that's the UK data, understanding society.
Yeah, this is what I'm looking for. This is I mean, I already saw it and I'm trying to gain access. I also understand that it's a panel for 20 or 30 years. So that's
it's individual and it's a panel. They also check like if you vote for parties and if you support some particular political party and something like that. And they have massive information regarding individual demographics and socio-economic situations. So that would be something.
That's definitely a future paper, yes.
Yeah. Thank you.
Well, of course, we can,
I have a couple of questions. The first one is really about, you mentioned the individual observables.
Yeah.
What about the non-observables?
Yes,
seems
of course.
to be a big part, because you talk about sorting, but a big part of that sorting is not in that analysis. So it's difficult for me to understand. If I'm living in a city, I'm more likely to like the police of Europe, or if I'm going to live in the city because I like the police in Europe.
Yes.
And which is,
I mean,
your big story here, but I don't really see that in the analysis. So.
I totally take the point, and actually connects to your previous question, which is the second explanation. So not based on economic sense, but it's based on this more of a psychological story. I mean, here it's not expressed very well, but it's about these unobservable characteristics, and that's another paper, guys. There are plenty of work to be done here. I think it's difficult to test it with this data, but with this data set. But that's one of the key stories to test, and that opens up a further question, which is this one. Okay, if you have individual unobservables, are these unobservables driven by birth? There is a paper for example, by Clément Bosquet and Henry Overman, who is finally realizing that places matters. Journal of Urban Economics, and he argues that, and they argue that actually it's where you were born is important to. I mean, they focus on skills, not yeah. The other story, actually, the psychologists then tell you is not place of birth, but it's where you spend your years. But then it's unclear whether it's the first year of childhood. So there are lots of open questions to be tested. And I agree. I mean, the analysis is super ignorant on these points, so far at least.
I just have so first, I don't know if it is very easy to understand an ordinal logic in this context. So I do understand the continuum, right? But I think maybe for the first paper, maybe it would be easier to take that category that seems to be the most representative in the survey and just that to the category I think is excited towards something else, you know. So and then you compare people living in very excited or urban areas with people because when you present the results, I think it probably are going to be very similar because I think that that category seems to be overrepresented in your survey, and it will simplify when you explain because when it's an ordinary logic, it is not that straightforward. You know? You have to consider the coefficient that is coming for each category and then compare it to the base category that is exhibited. So I would just create a new variable that is just a binomial variable that compares a binary variable that compares, and then just apply a binomial logic topic which is your tool. At least on your presentations, maybe looking at the results for the different categories comparing to the base category, then you have a more kind of variability of how those coefficients relates to the base category. I also, you don't explain very much about the controls, if they are in levels or they are past information, you know. So then it will explain a bit more the decline, you know. So even if it is a cross-section, although I didn't understand, so you have a series of cross-sections, isn't it?
It's a series of cross-sections, so it's every wave is a cross-section, and they are put together.
You put together. This is why you use the fixed effects.
For the time fixed effects.
Yes, but if you want to compare with the decline is something that you are observing over time, right? Therefore, your controls are not in levels. Your controls should refer to a period of time. I don't know the controls that you are including in them, but I do guess that it should be, or at least your main variables should be somehow moderated by the growth in the period, and then you will see that if those variables have been somehow conditional to the growth in the period, so that could be an option to somehow talk about that decline, economic decline. I don't know, maybe we can discuss this later about how you are introducing your controls, if for instance these controls are based on that particular year or if they are based.
So, I mean, thanks for the point. They are individuals. So the first one on merging these, I know other people who use the same similar analysis. They, as a robustness, they merge the categories. We should do it. I mean, I don't present them because I somehow feel like there would be a lot of information, so I prefer to have this more granular. Also because you see there is this continuum, which is a big part of our in the paper. But as a robustness, we should do it. In terms of controls, I mean, it's again, I mean, the paper is very humble. We don't claim about the economic decline, so that's part of the future steps or the interpretation. But we don't have any economic controls so far. So it's just individual controls like age, gender, education, and these are in levels for obvious reasons, and they refer to the moment in which the people were interviewed. So it's and also on the time dimension, I haven't said it. I have tried the results running wave by wave, seeing whether there was a change over time. It's very modest. So somehow there is a sort of, if anything, the differences are smaller in the recent years, and my feeling is that because the places have become more similar, so places, so this content has grown everywhere, so the differences are reducing. But again, I mean, these are cross-sectional, so I would be very scared. I mean, I would take with a pinch of salt the time dimension, because we really don't know whether we are interviewing the same people or whether it's. I mean, it should be a representative sample, a random sample, but.
And the last one, it is a paper by, I think it's from Martin Garretson and some people from Cambridge as well.